Karma yoga, as I said, is a long karma or action. It basically means the right action with the right action. What is the right action? Action is done for the greater good, not for selfish reasons. Done as an offering to God with no expectation in return. So that means we should give up all doership or deservership. I'm only an instrument performing the work of God, and there's no attachment to the fruits of action. So every action that we do, we dedicate it to the higher self or to God or to the universe, whoever we believe in. And we do not believe that this individual entity, the ego or this name or form is doing it. It is the higher self who's doing it, but I'm just an instrument. I'm just doing it on his behalf. And if I don't have doership, then I won't have deservership. I don't take credit or discredit. Because everything is happening by the law of that supreme consciousness. And then I have no attachment to the fruits of action. I do not, depend on that. If I do a certain action, I expect something to happen. No, I just do my action and I'm happy doing the action. And whatever happens after that is not a problem. So do your best and leave the rest to the universe. Sorry, I think I'll keep going back. So the next one is Bhakti Yoga, it is the yoga of devotion. Those of us who are more emotional, I think this is prescribed for those. And we all have a bit of devotion, a bit of faith. So a devotee feels a consummate fulfillment in loving the Lord of his heart. So the bhakti or the devotion is to be love, that divine love that flows through all of us. It is different to be in love or to be love. When you are in love, there's still two people here who love somebody else. But to be love is you are that one supreme love which flows through everybody. So there's no change. So that is what the ultimate feeling is, that I am just pure divine love, which is flowing through everyone. Jnana Yoga is a path of knowledge, also more accurately, knowledge is the path of wisdom. It is a means to self-realization through the process of reasoning. So basically the process of discrimination between what is real and what is not real, what is true and what is not true. And this is through the study of scriptures and self-inquiry. So this is where, our ancient rishis or seers, they wrote down, and it said that it's not the rishis who wrote down, they directly downloaded this information or knowledge from the supreme consciousness or God or universe, whatever you call it. And if we study the scriptures carefully, then we will know what the knowledge is. And once we have learned the knowledge, we have to reflect on it. So there are three different stages defined in Vedanta. It's called Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasana. Shravanam is you first listen to the knowledge. You listen to knowledge from a master, you read the scriptures. The second is Mananam, where you reflect on the knowledge. So you basically reflect on, okay, what does this mean to me? And once you've reflected enough, then you are ready to contemplate and meditate. So the fourth one is the Hatha Yoga, the Kriya Yoga. And the word Hatha comes from Ha, which means sun, and Cha means move. Hatha Yoga blends energizing and dynamic yoga postures, which I'm sure all of us have practiced today earlier, represented by the sun, with relaxing and meditative yoga postures represented by the moon. And Hatha Yoga offers a balanced and well-rounded sequence of yoga postures so that the energy in the body reaches perfect equilibrium. I'll go to the next slide. So, and Hatha also in Sanskrit means strong. So Hatha Yoga is often practiced with strong determination. And the Hatha Yoga can involve any of these. So the Hatha or the Kriya Yoga can involve either the asanas, which are the body postures, pranayamas, which are the various breathing techniques, mantras, chanting or reciting, mudras, which are the hand gestures, shakriya or shaktani, which are the various cleansing techniques, and the visual imaging. These can all pass together in Hatha Yoga. And then is the ultimate yoga, which is the Raja Yoga, as I said. Raja actually means king or chief. And it basically means the best or the highest form of yoga because it actually means effortless meditation. So when I was talking about the Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasana, Once we have reflected and inquired upon that knowledge enough, we've done our selfless practices enough, then we automatically reach a stage where we go into effortless meditation. And that is the important thing, that it's effortless. You don't have to put any effort. And what is happening in meditation? You develop a connection with God or consciousness by unidentifying with the ego-based self, that is this body, mind, and intellect. So you disidentify with this body, mind, intellect, and you identify with the supreme self, which is the truth. And it is primarily interior practice with an outward spiritual expression. Okay. So can I just pause here for any questions before I move forward to the next phase of this presentation? Any questions? Does it make any sense what I'm talking about? Do you relate to it? Is this new or?
Congratulations, very well planned, and again you are executing just that. Very proud.
All right, I'll continue. You might have some questions later on. Yoga and mental health. Now it's a okay. So what are the scientific effects of yoga, physiological effects of yoga, which have been proven? So the yogic breathing techniques, they use a number of physiological effects of the body. Various studies, there's lots of literature. I didn't bring the literature, the references, but you have to believe me that I've done research on it, and I know that these are the changes which have been reported. So there's increased parasympathetic drive in the body, there's reduced sympathetic drive. So we all know the sympathetic drive is the one when you're anxious, or heart rate goes up, and you're tremulous. That is when the sympathetic drive goes up. So yoga brings that sympathetic drive down. It has a calming effect. It calms the stress response system. It's a hypothalamus system, and it calms that down. And also it has antioxidant effects. And then there are more studies to indicate that exercise and meditation may cause alteration in the serotonin and norepinephrine system in the brain. Serotonin and norepinephrine are the main neurochemicals which are involved in the origin of depression and anxiety. They also release endogenous opioids, and that's pain by practicing yoga. Again, the stress response goes down, and there's also increase in GABA, which is again a neurochemical called GABA-butyric acid, which is like an inhibitory neurochemical in the brain, which kind of calms down the nervous system. So, when you look at what is the effect of yoga and mental health, it's a huge field. And when I did a literature search, there are about 300 papers came out. Now, I can't present everything here in 10 minutes. So what would be, the best way of presenting all the evidence? So what I did was, I thought maybe let's look at 3 main systematic reviews. Systematic reviews are the studies that combine all the studies. Like they do a very thorough research on how many studies have been done in this particular field. And they combine the good quality studies together. Majority of them are good quality studies. And then they come up with a common conclusion whether we have enough evidence or not in a particular field. The downside of systematic review is if the studies that we are trying to combine the results of are very heterogeneous and they have different parts to them or different interventions or different control groups, then it becomes very difficult to combine the results. So the results are kind of inconclusive sometimes. So let's see, what the evidence say. So to study the yoga and depression, this was a systematic review actually published just in 2023 March, this year, the 20 years of psychiatry. The objective was to explore the evidence of yoga's efficacy in patients with depressive disorder. They did a very, thorough research. They used some good scales, to define improvement in depression and also anxiety scales. They included 34 randomized controlled trials, which is a good sample, and they found included about 1,200 patients and 1,000 of control group, which is like a good size. But one thing important is the heterogeneity. That they found that these studies, 24 studies, they differ from each other because there are different types of yoga, as we know that the different types of yoga, hatha yoga, kriya yoga. The duration and the frequency of the intervention that was used in the studies. The control groups were different. and whether the yoga therapy was used alone or as adjunct. So that is why we have to be careful when we interpret the results of the study because different types of yoga will have different results. So they found that compared to the control group, there was a moderate effect of yoga on improvement of depressive symptoms and moderate improvement on the severity of depressive symptoms. Yoga had negligible effect on the improvement of the level of anxiety, but there were no adverse events that was noticed in the yoga group during the treatment. Now they did do some subgroup analysis depending upon the types of studies. 34 studies they did subgroup analysis. So they looked at the studies which were done from Asia. They found that those were less heterogeneous than those from North America, and they had a moderately positive effect on improving depressive symptoms.
Is Asia and North America?
No, it was all over the world, but there were so many studies available from Asia and North America, they could combine. There were only 3 studies with only yoga as an intervention and 5 with yoga and meditation as an intervention. The results show that the intervention, including both yoga and meditation, compared with the only yoga, depressive symptoms improved. Duration. So they found that the 6 studies were short-term, so less than 8 weeks intervention. 2 studies were long-term, more than 15 weeks intervention. And both of them had a moderate effect on depressive symptoms of severity. The impact of the short-term intervention was found to be more significant. Frequency, so less than 4 weeks, more than 4 weeks, both types had a moderate effect, and the impact of the high-frequency intervention was more significant. So they concluded from this meta-analysis of the SMART review that yoga can improve depressive symptoms and anxiety in patients with major depressive disorder and has a safe and wide patient acceptance, but there were limitations. That a moderate number of studies were included, but some of the included articles were published long ago and low quality. So when we say low quality, that means there may be a factor of bias involved, so it's very difficult to interpret the results if the studies are not good quality. The authors did not conduct a subgroup analysis to compare the differences between yoga alone and yoga as an adjunct to psychotherapy. And they could not conclude the optimal duration and frequency of exercise in yoga to improve the These were the limitations of their system. Looking at yoga for anxiety, this was again a systematic review. This was published a few years ago, this is 2018. Again, similar aim to look at effectiveness and safety of yoga for anxiety. They did a yoga class literature search. The studies included were only about 8, which is not a big sample size. And they found small short-term effects of yoga on anxiety compared to treatment and small effects of depression compared to treatment. Summary was yoga might be beneficial in the short term for improving intensive anxiety compared to therapists. No effects were found in only patients with DSM diagnosed anxiety disorder when given analysis. What this means is that those individuals who reported an increased level of anxiety, they may have shown some improvement, but those who are actually diagnosed using clear DSM criteria of anxiety disorder, there they did not find much improvement. Conclusion, yoga might be an effective and safe intervention in individuals with anxiety. Inconclusive evidence of effects of yoga in anxiety disorder as much, and more high quality studies. There were again limitations. So you have to always interpret with a pinch of salt by all of these analyses. The last one, I'll be done in 3 minutes. Hatha yoga, again, systematic review of hatha yoga for acute chronic treatment-resistant mood anxiety disorders. And this was again published a few years ago. And they looked at 18 studies they found, and they were able to get a data of 13 studies, which is a reasonable sample size, not great. And they actually found no significant effect of hatha yoga on symptoms of depression compared to as usual. Though a comparison of yoga to psychoeducational control groups showed that hatha yoga led to reduction of symptoms. But they found that again, this study had a lot of limitations. They said that the included studies were heterogeneous with regard to type of clinical population, among the length of yoga practice, yoga ingredients, and control group. Several studies describe the intervention as yoga without being specific regarding why the intervention was considered yoga-based. So again, the reliability of the yoga technique cannot be proven, so that those are all the limitations. And then again, the heterogeneous type of control group. So they said that some of the control groups found to be effective in treating depression with aerobic exercise and mindfulness. So their inclusion as active control would actually lessen the likelihood of finding. Those are more limitations. So I would probably finish by the bottom line that yoga is actually a subjective science. It's very difficult to measure the effects of yoga objectively. So as we said that the whole purpose of yoga is to realize that supreme consciousness. And how many of us actually practice yoga with that purpose? It involves an amount of faith and commitment. So I will leave you with that question that, can we objectively measure the effect of yoga without knowing the extent of faith and commitment we have towards this?
When you said the studies were done on floors earlier and hopefully also similar duration and whatnot, but when you're doing clinical trial and medication, you know what chemical is going in what dosage. Whereas with yoga, an individual effort going in, which should be
very subjective.
Very subjective.
Absolutely. Okay,
Are there any other questions? But what was the average duration of the clinical trial at this time?
6 to 12 intervention duration.
The reason I bring it up because this is general knowledge, but maybe it's not investigated in clinical trial. Benefits of yoga only come after long-term research, not in.
Incidentally, some of the studies actually showed that the smaller duration of intervention had quicker, significant response. But that is what I feel is a knee-jerk response that you see. It's not the real effect of yoga that you see. And I can talk from a personal on only one kind of one. I started seeing the effect of yoga on myself after 5 years of practicing it with good commitment. Because earlier I would just do here and there. So it's like,
So which branch of yoga are we practicing? How do we pick up those things?
If you ask me personally, I'm practicing all of them. So all the 4 pathways, plus the Raj Yoga. Yes. And that's what I realized, that if you combine all of them together, the effect is exponential.
So what were your effects after 5 years?
I feel very content in life. I just feel happier. And we have to define what happiness is, what joy is, because a lot of times we feel that, living, having a happy moment is good. And that is what is happiness. But I feel that I always experience temporary joy or temporary happiness. I don't mean to say that I'm infinitely happy, but it takes me less time to recover from any sorrowful event. So, my life was like happy, sorrow, happy, sorrow, happy, sorrow. And now my life is like this. So whatever life throws at me, I don't get affected by it too much. It maybe takes sometimes a few minutes or an hour to just think about it. Okay, not a big deal, come back. So that is what I feel practicing yoga. And I'm just more balanced in my.
I can vouch for it.
What is the ideal duration for yoga? Like half an hour, 15 minutes, like on daily basis, like how much one you spend?
If you're looking for, I can comment on meditation. It is said that if you're really contemplating, 20 minutes twice a day is generally, recommended, 20 minutes twice a day for contemplation. But the contemplation is better if you precede that with at least 20 minutes a day. But I'm not a yoga teacher. I will let yoga teachers talk about it, but I'm just talking about from my own personal experience as well as what I've read about things. But if you go by the ancient great master Swami Chinmayananda, somebody asked him, how long do I have to meditate? And he said, lifelong, 24/7.
One more question and then we have to move on.
It was really a comment, and I'm just using the word yoga. So if you talked about 20 minutes of asana, you'd likely want to consider these 20 minutes of pranayama as well. Like really, it's yoga is just not a word about.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
And just our next speaker, I'd like to just maybe add a few words about yoga and meditation. But from an experience perspective, and maybe give you a little bit of a background of what I've done in this field. I'm also a coach. I've been a coach, a sales coach. I've attended other forms of training beyond yoga and meditation. I've done a lot of yoga and meditation courses. And I can tell you from experience that yoga, the physical part has a huge effect on you. I mean, if you go to any personal trainer today, if you go to any good physical trainer, they will always tell you that flexibility is important. Before 10 years ago, they would always make you build up muscle and that was good enough. You do muscles and cardio. Well, guess what happens as you age? Your joints give out. And so as you get older, yoga actually does better for your body in terms of core. And again, I'm not an academician, so please don't call me out on that. But I know a community of trainers, and they completely change their point of view, their approach when it comes to people over. So I think that there is a physical part. Coming to the mental part, if your physical is at rest and it's calm, then your mind will be at rest. So it's a very logical thing. And those who have meditated, scientifically aside, I'm just offering it to you. There is a huge benefit, and there's a psychosomatic benefit too. That when my mind is calm, my heart is calm, my body is calm, I have less disease. So I think there's a very clear chain reaction to yoga. And thank you, Kamini, for elaborating that yoga is more than simply asanas, right? So you have the meditation in there. And as your thoughts are, so shall you be. I mean, if I'm impure in my thoughts all the time, I'm watching just violence all the time on TV, and then I try and meditate. All I'm doing is going from negative to positive, and you don't really get that. The other thing about long-term effects, I'd say, is I think yoga and meditation is just like working out. How many here expect going to a gym 4 times a day or 4 times a week for 4 weeks will give you a better body? Nobody. Yet, so we accept that as common sense. Yet the mind, which is 30,000 times bigger and 30,000 times noisier, we expect a quick fix. That is just not going to happen. So I think we create the problem, and then we look for that Tylenol, that ultra strength Tylenol to pop in and say magic. It doesn't work like that. And I think nothing in life really works like that. Whether it's building a business, whether it's building your body, whether it's building a relationship, it's always a marathon. And I think this is no exception. And of course, it's a wonderful, no side effects, right? At least when you meditate compared to meditation. So at least that's a good thing. But that's just a couple of personal viewpoints on what we've heard. So on to our next speaker. And our time is still 6 o'clock. So, if we can keep the discussion to 20 minutes or presentation in 20 minutes, that would be appreciated, including me. And so our next speaker, Dr. Laura Rosen, research is focused on studying individuals' motives for engaging in drug use and how those motives relate to the risk of developing substance use disorders and behavioral addictions. Dr. Rosen's teachings and research is informed by her education in neuroscience and her community-based work with nonprofit development organizations. Please help me welcome Dr. Rosen.
I know.
Yeah, that's a routine.
We'll go for. Thank you for the intro. So my background is in neurobiology and nutrition. And I have come to understand really the power of mindfulness for teaching addictive behaviors at King's. Second, of course, where we talk about substance use, which is my area of expertise, transitioning into learning more and more about behavioral disease. So I'll touch on a bit of that, and I will touch a bit on yoga for addiction. So, brief definition to get us started. What is addiction? Think about really heavy drugs, right? Think about addicts or junkies, people with needles in their arm. It is a lot more broad. And I'm going to contextualize it in a slightly different way that I think will make it clear how or where the benefits of mindfulness are. So the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychiatric Disorders, so the Bible that helps us diagnose and study mental illness, defines addiction as this chronic and relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite adverse consequences. So what that means is using a substance again and again and again over the course of years, that's the chronic components, regardless of the fact that there are these adverse consequences. And these consequences can be, or often are, in many areas of life. So you have physical effects, right? Generally if you smoke for a long time, you have an increased risk of developing cancer, right? But the person who is addicted to nicotine does not stop smoking knowing that risk, right? They continue strained relationships, strained friendships, right? Economic issues. The cocaine habit that is really expensive after a while, right? And then the psychological drawbacks as well. Addiction is highly comorbid with anxiety, depression, as well as PTSD and schizophrenia too. It's a bit of a reciprocal relationship between these disorders. So really what we're seeing with addiction from a behavioral standpoint too is a loss of choice, a loss of control over actions. The person who is struggling with big drugs does not want to be in that position, does not want to be suffering these consequences and would do really anything to give it up. They're unable to. There's something else going on. So who becomes addicted? Who lives with the struggle? There are a number of risk factors that are known and pretty well studied. They generally get lumped into environment versus genetics. It's a little bit more complex than that, but I'll be really brief. When we think of environment as a risk factor for addiction, we start off usually with a family unit, right? How did you grow up? How supportive were your parents related to your emotions? What is your social support system like? Do you have people to support you in hard times? What are your socioeconomic factors, right? Living in poverty, especially for a long period of time, because of the major risk factor of addiction. There are known genes that do contribute to a risk of developing addiction as well. We're learning more about them all the time now. And then there's these behavioral components. So the first really big one is impulsivity. So impulsivity is this inability to really put a pause between thinking about engaging in an action and then engaging in it. So that inability to kind of stop and think, choose that action is impulsivity. It's not bad in and of itself, but it tends to be linked to this higher likelihood of developing addiction. Emotional dysregulation, so having potentially really intense emotions and not really knowing how to cope with them, manage them, or constantly fluctuating intense emotions can also be a big risk factor. Not being able to delay gratification, always needing that reward as quickly as possible, not being able to cope with stress, anxiety, all to the person as well. Again, like I mentioned, diagnosis of psychotic disorder, experiencing childhood trauma is a really big one, long-term unemployment and heavy stress, right? And then the last piece too is a little bit different, and sparks a pretty big debate in this literature. But the access and ubiquity to addictive substance can also increase that risk too. So I can talk about that for hours in terms of drug regulation, but I want you to kind of put a pin in that point as we transition to talk about behavioral addictions near the end. But what I do want to point out is that none of these risk factors are either necessary nor sufficient for developing addiction. So what that means is you can have 0 risk factors and still develop an addiction. You can have a whole host of these risk factors and not develop an addiction. That's a really important piece to remember. So we're always talking in terms of likelihoods rather than absolutes. And you could have all the genes that say I'm absolutely going to have develop an addiction, right? My parents are both alcoholic, et cetera, et cetera. But that is by no means perfect. Right? about addiction without talking about dopamine. So it is the one neurotransmitter I noticed that you did not mention, although there are others that are important to addiction. When we think of dopamine, we think of a pleasure hit, right? We think of reward, and that is the case, but it's also neurotransmitter that's really critical for learning. It is our brain's natural way of teaching us to keep doing things that are good for us, that are going to promote our survival and that are going to promote survival of our species. And it's really important in this cause and effect kind of way. So think to Pavlov's dog, who learned to associate the sound of a bell ringing to getting food, and then learning that if I hear the bell, I can anticipate some food. That dog's getting a bit of a dopamine rush whenever you hear that bell. So yes, there is reward. You can also think of dopamine as the salient signal. It's our brain saying, hey, this thing is saying, I'm going to make you feel good because this is an important thing for survival. So when we eat, when we have a positive social interaction, when we have sex, we get, in addition to many other neurotransmitters, we do get release of dopamine. We also get release of dopamine in anticipation of those rewards too. If I smell cookies, I'm going to get a rush of dopamine. I don't have to keep cookies to get the dopamine. So we get this release to natural rewards, but our less natural or more engineered rewards also produce dopamine rushes as well. So drug use, talk about more in a moment, gambling, junk food, which is still food, but it's not the kind of food we live, watching pornography, shopping, using social media, those will all increase dopamine in the brain. Yeah. The difference between drugs of abuse and its natural rewards is that they will increase dopamine in a slightly different way. So they're not acting on our brain, they're not acting on circuits that don't exist otherwise. When people say that drugs hijack our brain, so they're using these natural learning circuits that we need to be motivated to seek out food, to be motivated to propagate the species of kids. It's that we do so much more quickly. So every drug that people use does this in a slightly different way. And risk for becoming addicted to a drug is in part related to how potently it activates the system and in what specific ways. So cocaine, for instance, will produce more dopamine and have that hanging around, floating around in the brain a lot longer than sugar will. Although, depending on the dose of sugar, there's some interesting studies that says they're more equivalent than sugar. But what happens over a long period of time is that our brain gets used to this high concentrations of dopamine. And we want to have this natural responsiveness to natural rewards, right? It is a training to have to keep going and to stay healthy, interacting with people. But over time, if we keep hitting on this system really, really hard, overactivation of dopamine all the time, brain's like, okay, I get it. I don't need to make any of my own. It's coming from somewhere else. I'm going to dial it down. So the brain adapts. The brain produces less of its own dopamine naturally. And what that means is that if someone's not taking a drug after they've been taking a drug for a long period of time, now they're not going to feel a reward in response to food or sex or positive social interactions or exercise, right? So they're going to feel lower than baseline, the average person. And those natural rewards won't have the same things over time, worse and worse eventually. And the drive forward using the drug is basically to get back to feeling normal, right? People who are using substances who have an addiction are not constantly trying to get, they're constantly trying to get high in some sense, but really it is an effort to feel normal. It's an effort to cope with the pain of withdrawal. It's an effort to cope with the tension and anxiety that comes with it. Deficient dopamine. So again, that's where a lot of that choice kind of gets taken away in addiction. And again, over the long term, people really get stuck in this craving cycle. So what happens with drug, they rush of dopamine, and then the body kind of crashes. You always kind of undershoot before you come back to normal, but undershoot after a big dopamine crash. Like if you have too much sugar, right? Sugar high and sugar. Same thing with dopamine. That withdrawal from dopamine, especially if you've gone real high, It's really, really awful. It is painful, it's anxiety provoking, really intense states of just euphoria and depression, depending on the drug. It's gonna look a little bit different. I promise, no matter the drug, it's always gonna feel terrible, especially more and more so over the long term. So combination of experiencing withdrawal from the last time you used with not being able to produce your own natural dopamine starts the craving cycle, right? Your body's like, I need that dopamine back. It's like, terrible. How am I gonna do it? That's craving, right? So basically it starts to build over time. The longer and longer someone goes without using that substance, the more and more they start to try and ignore it, but that's really not how craving works. It is basically going to build until there is something, right? Until you get another hit to feel okay with the rest of the day and start the cycle. What typically happens too is there's often regret and guilt that comes immediately after the hit, feel a little bit better, and then I should have done. I want to stay abstinent. I want to be healthy. I want to get off this drug. I've done it again. It starts feelings of tension, anxiety, pain, regret. Starts the cycle. Chronic addiction is really typified by the cycle. It's really the lower lows every time you go around. Virtually pretty quickly. So, knowing what you know about mindfulness, you might kind of have a sense of where I'm going with all of this. So, as a reminder, mindfulness in particular is this idea of present moment. Being able to observe thoughts, feelings, and sensations without judgment. So, key here is to accept the pain, accept the anxiety, accept the load, and know that it will pass in time, right? It is not the end of the world. It is not a new permanent state. It will pass. And if we can, separate a little bit and understand that these aversive feelings aren't just happening to you, right? That takes away this pressure that you have to manage them, that you have to do something, that you have to go out and seek a dopamine hit to release that tension. So in theory, with mindfulness, but being able to get some separation between thought and action, cope with those cravings, let them pass, let them wash over, and then reduce that chance of relapse, right? And basically break out of that cycle. Add some cognitive flexibility, some choice and action, and be able to act in line with long-term goals. So when we're talking about mindfulness and substance use disorders, specifically, one of the biggest techniques that's used is called purge surfing. And it is rooted in really ancient mindfulness techniques, but it's been defined in the Western world a little bit more recently. The idea here is visualize a craving as a wave to help us conceptualize that it can come in intense paths, right? The idea is just like in the ocean, a wave seems to come out of nowhere, huge, but it always passes, right? But just because it's intense doesn't mean it's forever. So we can decouple a little bit here. And it also, if we extend this metaphor, it helps us to understand how trying to ignore craving or distract ourselves from it isn't going to be an effective way to overcome it, right? One strategy for coping with cravings is to distract, right? So if anyone who tried to smoke, oh, I'm always craving a cigarette after I get off the phone with my mother, which is too much. You can distract yourself by trying to do something else for a little while, but eventually that you'll notice that tension rises more and more to the surface. Try and close your eyes and turn around, the wave is just going to come. You can't stop it. But urge surfing is really riding on top of that wave and noticing that it's there and riding it until its completion without either fighting it or trying to ignore it. There's a really interesting study done in 2013, a neuroimaging study that showed that smokers who are in recovery and were trained on urge surfing were actually able to manage their cravings much better with this technique on board. So shown in an MRI. So you took one in an MRI, you show them drug use. You show someone who has who's struggling with an addiction, like pictures of the drug, pictures of things related to the drug, typically activates their brains, it sets off craving, right? But if people are able to urge surf in the face of those drug cues, they're able to let pass and you actually see less activation in brain areas related to cravings. This is really quite powerful. So there's lots and lots of evidence that mindfulness-based programs should be effective for treatment addiction. They can reduce both how often people use and how much they use if they do relapse. And if you're using less, you tend to have fewer use-related problems. And this has been shown to work for a variety of substances, nicotine and tobacco, alcohol, opioids. But kind of being on some of the themes of yoga more generally, mental health, there isn't a clear gold standard. There isn't a clear program that works, that we know is going to be effective in X, Y, Z. I also don't really understand this biological factor that controls or explains how mindfulness can help people with cravings and ultimately save abstinence and hunger. Again, probably the best bet is to integrate mindfulness practice into other treatments. Or existing treatments for addiction are not, they're great in many ways, but they certainly don't work 100% of the time. Relapse rates are still really high for people who go through formal treatment. So understanding how to integrate it with existing therapies might be a good thing to go. Now, the research on yoga in particular for substance use disorders is more limited. There are a series of meta-analyses and let's leave it in the analysis report. That again generally point to yoga is probably helpful in ways, but it's even more. So Sudarshan Priya and Hatha are the most studied forms of yoga in this context, and mostly for nicotine and smoking, but somewhat for alcohol and opioids as well. Again, even more variety. So we get variety in the kind of intervention, the length of intervention, type of yoga. There's a lot of studies that point to yoga broadly, but don't break it down to make it really clear. So in a lot of these cases, the yoga experts in the room would read this paper and say, well, I have absolutely no idea what they actually did. So it's really hard to know what the best bet is. There are a handful of studies too that say yoga doesn't provide benefit above and beyond what we call treatment as usual, how you would otherwise treat patients, which is not great from a statistical standpoint, but from the standpoint of understanding that up to 80% of people will relapse after 1 year of completing their treatment anyways. Maybe that's not the highest standard we should be holding that to. So again, we really want to investigate an adjunct yoga plus other known to be effective treatments. So again, a lot of the limitations you've already heard about for yoga for mental health apply here as well. So there's a lot of studies that aren't blind. So researchers know who, the gold standard is to not know who's received yoga or a controlled condition, and then only measure them on outcomes and see if the statistics basically work out, if there's a difference. So a lot of the times the researchers know if someone's gotten yoga bias in their existence. Small sample sizes too. From a statistics standpoint, it's not really a great way to walk away with strong evidence in support of this treatment. Again, huge range of interventions. The shortest intervention I saw was 15 minutes once. Totally effective, honestly. Most interventions were about in the 8 to 12 week range, most often once a week. I think there's only one study I found that had a 6-month intervention where people were practicing for half an hour every day. Listening a little bit closer to outcome measures vary a lot too. So if what our goal is to get people to stop using substances, we think we'd be measuring that. Most of the studies don't look at that. Most studies ask, are you more motivated to quit using that drug? Or do you feel less anxious? Or do you feel less depressed? All of which are great, all of which are a part of a good recovery, but in terms of actually getting to that primary outcome measure, the literature is still a little bit lacking in that respect. And then there's going to be different kinds of yoga or different yoga practices that might be a better fit for certain kinds of substance use disorders. So withdrawal from alcohol looks very different from withdrawal from opioids or withdrawal from a stimulant like cocaine. So we're talking about getting someone out of that acute phase as they're getting clean. We might have a different approach versus the long-term strategies So, my last 2 minutes, I just want to talk a little bit about our daily life and where, maybe all of this is like, I don't really care that much. I'm not addicted to cocaine. What are you telling me about? But think about our day-to-day life, especially now, how much competition there is for our attention with all of these stimuli basically that are giving us these big dopamine hits on a regular basis, right? Think about cell phone, news, or even just the regular news, clickbait kind of titles, really sensationalized headlines that are constantly drawing our attention. Pay attention, right? I will, again, it's potentially a contentious statement, but really any behavior that increases dopamine, especially a lot, can potentially become addictive, right? And there's a lot of things in our daily lives that are designed to release as much dopamine as possible, as often as possible, right? So cell phones are an excellent example. Social media is an excellent example. I promise you, if you use Facebook, right? Facebook is mostly blue, right? All the headers are blue. And the little notification icons are red. That is by design, right? They're supposed to pop out. They're supposed to grab you. The kinds of things that pop up in your news are designed to reach you or elicit the most emotion possible. So it's helpful to keep that in mind, right? Because if you ever feel like, feel a little lost without my phone on me, or it's been a while since I checked my email, maybe I should. That kind of irritability and sense of loss, it's kind of like a mini craving, right? It's being a little bit in that cycle. So you'll notice over time, are you really choosing to check your email? Is something telling you inside you to check? Now the good news is mindfulness is control of the behavioral addiction as well. So it's studied in the context of watching pornography, mediating kind of this what's called the mood to food relationship. So how about anything? I know when I'm feeling stressed, I love to go for that really junk food. But mindfulness practice can help to, again, put that pause in between the thought and the feeling and the action. Do I really want ice cream at 9 in the morning, or did I just get an email that made me feel it's been used in treating dependence on online gaming and for social media addiction too. So overall, mindfulness is broadly effective in treating both substance use disorders and behavioral addictions. And it helps again to give a bit of choice back to individuals, right? To take away some of that automaticity of feeling and or tension and motivation and behavior to manage that. There is some evidence for effectiveness of yoga as well. We need a little bit more study to understand that relationship. And there's no clear, like, hey, you practice yoga 6 times and then cure. There is no quick fix. There is no easy pill to swallow that's gonna give you like a silver bullet above and beyond current treatment. So I think the best bet is to integrate multiple treatments, and yoga can absolutely be a part of an effective addiction treatment. Because the best addiction treatments are the ones that address the whole person. So yoga really play a really large role. Of course, yoga and mindfulness are really safe and well tolerated, so it can absolutely be integrated into those treatments. So, email me if you have questions. References are there. Maybe we can share the slides online.
Sure.
But I will also note quickly, if any of this has been kind of interesting to you, I've got a couple of book recommendations. They're all excellent. Dopamine Nation is talks a lot about, again, day-to-day dopamine hits that we get. Technology and how to manage them. The Creative Mind is similar idea. Also basically applying mindfulness to behavioral addiction, but also anxiety as well. Breath is a lot of yoga techniques with a Western lens. It's a really interesting read. And in the realm of this is kind of like a classic, a great summary of addiction by Dr. Gopal who works at West. Okay, thank you very much.
Questions? Dr. Rosen, what's the accepted success of supplementation prerequisites? Of chemical prerequisites for
Like for treating now? really weird. So I'm not an addiction therapist or clinician. I don't know that it is a primary line. Typically, the first line for really severe substance use disorder would be supplementing whatever substance it's the individual's been using to minimize the effects of methadone for opioids.
Just suggested sometime decades ago.
I think anytime you're taking a pill or you're supplementing neurotransmitter, it's not selective. So, I mean, you don't have just a universal increase of dopamine. It's sensitization in some areas, in the emotional regulation areas, desensitization of the prefrontal cortex. So that long-term planning and thinking. So have less and less future-oriented and more present aversion-oriented. It's not a straight a bunch of dopamine. Oh. And if anything, you want it to be a little slow dose. And the idea is to be able to pick up the spikes of natural reports relative to baseline, rather than always having lots of
The questions? Okay, let's give a big round of applause. That was very good. Really liked the dopamine stories and how you get my phone when you're talking.
Thank you.
You're like, oh, I didn't like how they're taking notes. Or surfing. That was a great word. I think that what I took away from there, and I think most of you probably did, was nobody here, I think, is a drug addict, but that the new drug is right in front of you, right, with you all the time. And I think that was actually quite poignant for me. And I saw a Netflix documentary. I think it's a very beautiful documentary about this, but how we are pretty much programmed. And what you said about Facebook using colors very deliberately is in there. So it's kind of scary to think that you don't, it's not you, it's not me, but actually you are the victim, right? So that's it. Okay, thank you. So moving on to our next speaker, Dr. Imans Barus is a professor of psychology at King's University College, where he teaches courses about consciousness, altered states of consciousness, and the psychology of religion and spirituality, very interesting topics. He's the author of 8 books, including Death as an Altered State of Consciousness. Please help me welcome Dr. Imans Barus. This is forward.
Thank you, Archie, for inviting me to be part of the panel. It's so good to see all of you here, and hopefully I can say something. So Yoking are joining, as you heard, the meeting, the word yoga, and as the Oxford Dictionary of Religions, they're techniques transforming consciousness and attaining liberation as higher states of consciousness. So I want to focus on the higher state of consciousness. These are different names: transcendent states, samadhi, nirvana, and enlightenment. The way to talk to consciousness is to experience exceptional psychological well-being, non-involuntary experience, fundamental well-being, and so on. In different ways, different. You want me louder? I can be louder. Different ways of talking about these higher states of consciousness, and we want to distinguish these from pathological states such as mania, realization, psychosis, and so on. And so the idea here is that we want to shift from ordinary waking state into a higher state of consciousness. That's kind of like the framework that we're talking about here. You want, okay, I'm in the ordinary waking state. I would like to be in the higher state of consciousness when I'm experiencing fundamental well-being all the time. So I want to talk a little bit about Jeffrey Martin. So for his PhD at the California Institute of Mental Studies, he went around the world. He found 60 people who were in a persistent transcendent state of consciousness. I asked him at one point, I said, Jeffrey, how much money does it cost you? He sort of shrugged his shoulders, I don't know, $1 million, $2 million. So the lad has money, and so he spent the money to go around the world, find these people. He found 60 people. But one of the things that he found was that not everybody was in the same place. Samadhi is not the same as nirvana, is not the same as, you know, whatever else. And so he identified these, what he called these locations. Location 1, 2, 3, 4, then beyond location 4. And these are sort of a progressive deepening or a progressive intensification of fundamental well-being, so that people can sort of move from one location to another. And one of the things that you notice, there's an increased sense of well-being in each location. There's a loss of the narrative self, so you stop talking to yourself as much. The mental chatter, the amount of mental chatter that's going on decreases. There's a shift toward positive emotions. Media was saying, you stop going down, you sort of stay up here. And then the loss of emotions altogether, you lose emotion. There's also, actually it's going to be talking about non-duality. There's alteration of non-duality and duality. So some of these locations are non-dual, others you return back to duality. And then as you go deeper, you get non-duality again, and so on. So the other thing he did was he interviewed these people for about 6 to 8 hours, he said, typically in their living room or in their cave or wherever they were. You see, some of these might be rishis, some might be like, I don't know, people involved in Muslim practices or Christian practice or no practice at all, or the New Age community or wherever we found them. And he asked them, what did you do? How did you get into this state? What helped you to get into this state? And so there are 6 classes of techniques that they had used. They could identify what these techniques were. So what he did was he turned around and he said, okay, fine, let's make an 18-week course and give people all these techniques. And then also we're going to, collect a lot of data. We can find out which ones work and which ones don't. And that's what he did. What are these techniques? Well, first of all, he didn't want people to have a dark night of the soul. So he gave people a lot of positive psychology exercises, forgiveness, gratitude, positive intent, those kinds of things. So he front loaded the program with a lot of positive psychology. And then if you look at the list here, this is sort of the kind of like the list that kind of after some time turned out to be the techniques that were most useful. So a lot of them are mindfulness-based techniques or modifications on mindfulness in different ways. The headless way is very interesting. So what he found was, he told me, 75% of people, when they were effective in switching into this deeper state of consciousness, it was through a process of self-examination. So basically, finding the self and having the self disappear. But anyway, so you can look these up later. I will give you an URL that you can use to get to these slides. So you can look at these slides afterwards if you want. You can have a look at them. Okay, so he ran it about 20 times since February 2014, with about 50 participants each time, and he actually reactivated as a cohort running right now. And success appears to be indicated by experiencing the subjective state of fundamental okayness about reality, and he claims to have a 73 and 74% success rate. Now this is a crazy level of success, because when you look at someone like Houston Smith, spent 10 years doing Zen meditation. So that's kind of the norm. And as someone who studies, as you're told, I study psychology of religion. I mean, that kind of number, like so when I talked to his advisor, and we just wondered if he was making this up. I also tried to persuade him to publish his work in an academic journal, which he has now done. So this is Psychology of Consciousness, which is the world's most prestigious journal publishing papers about consciousness. So he got it published. And so, okay, so you want to transition from the ordinary state of consciousness to a permanent state of consciousness, which are enlightened and in a state of bliss. So the Finder's course, shorter with 6-week course, prepared to fairly reliably shift participants into those states. And then, as I said, is that really true? Does that Finders Course yoga really work or not? There's an organization about 500 Finders Course alumni. Kelsey Thomas, one of my students, we decided, well, let's check. Let's find out if these people really are in this state of consciousness or not. We did that using a survey. We ran 2 studies, and I'm just going to talk about the first one here. There's a lot of data, and I'm only going to talk about a few things. But we published this in Psychology of Consciousness. 55 participants from the Finders Course, and very good distribution of locations. So this is what we wanted. We wanted to get possible, what locations are people in, so that we have some balance here. We measured a lot of things. But one of the first instruction we gave participants was this: please just sit quietly for the next minute. After approximately 1 minute, an arrow button will appear. Please click the arrow button. We lost a third of our participants right there. They couldn't sit through 60 minutes of not doing anything. But the ones who are left, so then we give them the phenomenology of conscious inventory, which is a wonderful measure that was developed by Ron Picala for studying hypnosis. But you can study anything with it. You basically, this is Kamini said, it's the subjective experience that we're after. And the phenomenology of consciousness inventory is used to measure subjective experience. So what are people's experiences along 14 different dimensions? So what did we find? Well, okayness increased as a result of location. So the further along you are, the more you have a deep sense of fundamental okayness, that everything in the universe is okay. And internal dialogue goes down. Okay, so this is consistent with what Jeffrey was finding. The internal chatter stops or becomes quiet. Dysphoric emotions. Okay, now this is at this point. This is where Kelsey and I are jaws drop, because we're talking about fear, and we have this epidemic of anxiety in our society. And once you're in location 2, notice that the number there is 0. Now, any of you who know anything at all about the social sciences, medical science, or anything, know that all variables have variability. Obviously, all variables have variability, unless you happen to be in location 2 or above, in which case you have no fear. Fear is gone. Anxiety is gone. Sadness is gone. Wow. Depression is gone. Not there. Anger is gone. Not there. So one of the things that we're thinking about is, wait, this has implications for counseling psychology. Well, we were thinking counseling psychology, but clearly psychiatry and clinical psychology as well. So we were struck by this. And we didn't, and these were all our data, not his data. So this was basically an independent study from the material that he had. We replicated these results in the second survey. Okay, so the positive feelings of love, as I said, they tend to go up but then down. You see that here. Joy, same thing. People start, once you get deeply enough into this, emotions become irrelevant. They're in some kind of state of consciousness where they are no longer important. And we also had people writing about their experience. So, for example, someone in location 4 said some lack of emotion which impacts my relationship with my wife and adult daughter. They don't understand. Forgetfulness, location 4, problems with forgetfulness. And I have to pay attention to how my neutral affect and location 4 can strike others as reptilian. They just no longer care. The narrative, it's not just their narrative is gone, the narrative, other people's narrative, you can't stand listening. It's like, shut up. Like, there's nothing happening. Now here's one that I found like really, really interesting. So as Kamini was saying, this idea that you're connected to everything. Well, in the PCI, you can measure body image. And you can see, like, item 26, my bodily feelings seem to expand into the world around me. So you're measuring the degree to which people feel that they're expanded beyond their physical self. Notice what happens. As you go into deeper and deeper states of, enlightenment, whatever this is, you're no longer identified with this body, like you're extended beyond the body. So what else have we got here? What actions would you take if you were living the state that you're in? None. My actions are not driven by my state. Other people said, they would get back to all the practices. Some people said no. I don't know. This state always seems to be present below any surface disturbance. So it's like there's an observation that somehow like this mental chatter is there, but there's always something underneath it, which is fine. There's like something there that you can sort of fall back into, or you drop into once this sort of surface chatter. Any detrimental effects? No, it's all worth it. But if I would have known the effects beforehand, I would have been put off. For example, I lost almost all of my sexual desire. That used to be a big reason for living. I lost a lot of my agency. Even though I never really worry about things anymore, I can be a bit confused sometimes when I notice that I don't have dreams or ambitions about the future. I don't really care so much. What will happen? Living or dying, form or emptiness. Okay, so one taste. For those of you who are interested also in Buddhism, one taste. It all tastes the same. No distinction. So what are the next steps here? So one of the things that Jeffrey was interested in doing was seeing if he can find a way to stimulate these states through sort of physiological stimulation. So he's been using sonic sculpting. So he's using transcranial ultrasound. Well, he's not doing it. He's letting the people who know how to use this equipment do it. So he has people, from Stanford University who do this for a living, only they're not allowed to do it, for these kinds of purposes. So they do it for him at night. So basically what you can do is you can read out what does the brain look like when it's in this transcendent state. And then you go, okay, well, that's fine. Now we just shape it into that state using sonic sculpting, transcranial ultrasound. And they've done that. So for those of you who don't know, there's a whole trans tech movement using technology in order to induce transcendent states of consciousness. And there's some pretty big names attached to that, such as Shinzen Young, for example. Okay, so this is what they're doing now. They're shaping the brain into the sort of the patterns that are consistent with being in those states of consciousness and finding that also works. So you can sort of you just push a button and you can be in that state, right? And then the question is, well, is that ethically, when you want, Jeffrey and I might talk for hours about this, hours at a time, about whether I'm going like, Jeffrey, like, what are you doing? And he's going, what button? I want everything to happen. Okay, so, and the other one that he's just started on now is AI informed practice. So you do Zen for 10 years, nothing happens. Well, so one of the things in his finder's course is, okay, you do something for a week, it didn't happen. Well, switch to another one of these techniques, because we've got like this long list of techniques that you can try. So try the headless way, it didn't work. Okay, fine. Do this type of mindfulness meditation, see what happens. Okay, see what happens. So you keep switching. And for different people, different things might work at different times. Same thing might work later, might not work after a while, and so on. So different techniques, and so using AI to try to so I'm just gathering this from some remarks that he made recently. Using AI to try to match what would be the optimal practice for you in order to move into the state. Okay, that's all I have to say because I tried to keep it short. And you can see these slides again. Now you have to write that down. There's no link to it. So if you want to see the slides again, they're up on the university's website. And there's my personal website if you want to see what I'm about. Thank you.
Any questions, Grace?
How did you measure okayness?
Yeah, well, in addition to, okay, I skipped over the part, first of all, I didn't put them all down, slides, and secondly, I skipped over the measures that we used. We had a long list of items in which we were asking people, specifically targeting, you know, do you have a sense of self, a sense of self-time? Do you think? Do you not think? Do you remember things? And so on. So we had a, including about how they felt. And so, you know, cluster analyzed all of that stuff. And one thing we found was that there, one of the clusters that came out was this okayness, fundamental okayness cluster. So people who feel, yeah, my life now feels like I feel that everything is okay. And that there's fundamentally there's goodness underneath everything that we find. And so that became one of our measures that we used, and we sort of used it. And it corresponded, as I showed you in one of the slides, there was that linear correlation with our measure of fundamental okayness with the location people are in. Because for Jeffrey, the locations, you're in a deeper state of fundamental awareness as you move towards the deeper location.
So when was this study done? Is it before Corona or after Corona pandemic?
This was, we collected the data about 3 years ago, I think. Yeah, so it was before the pandemic. In fact, it was during the pandemic, and Jeffrey was stuck in one of his houses in Indiana, not allowed to go in and stimulate people's brains. And so that's when he sort of sat down and he went, okay. So he took it down from 18 weeks to 6. So he basically extracted, so even out of those 18 weeks, he extracted the most essential ingredients, compacted the whole thing down to 8 weeks. So the 45, what he calls the 45-day challenge. And when he did sort of the outcome measures, he had almost the same rates of success as he did with the 8 weeks. So this goes to that, you know, sometimes the short practice. We know that was psychotherapy as well. When they started doing research on psychotherapy, sometimes the short interventions are just as effective as the long. So there's kind of this, if you've got the right techniques that you sort of moving them the right way. And then what he did was he went to the people who didn't transition. And he said, well, why didn't these people transition? And he found that it typically, what he finds is that there's trauma. And so people have this sort of buried trauma somewhere in their psyche. So then he's got these psychotherapists who know how to work with people's sort of childhood and whatever trauma. And he gets them to work on their trauma. And as they resolve the trauma, they're able to start moving into the state. So he now claims that he actually has a better than 74% success rate, because for the people who don't succeed with this collection of techniques, the mindfulness, self-examination, so on techniques, that going into that kind of psychotherapy mode then actually helps to facilitate them to switch in or flip into state of harmony. Just as another interesting note, like years ago, we talked about this and he started this and he proposed it. He was not in one of the locations. And I said, and we talked about that. I said, well, you know, our location. Yeah, no. I said, I'm a scientist. I'm just studying this. And then I saw him about 6 years later. I was talking to him that, yeah, he's in location too. I'm like, Jeffrey, you said you were going to the location. He said, yeah, well, I just didn't see the continued point of suffering. Or I just didn't see the point of continued suffering.
Last question, my last question. What's the average age of the participant for any of the locations?
These are usually people on in years, and they're usually people who are coming out of some spiritual practice or some kind of lifelong spiritual effort of some sort or other. And they've often switched between spiritual practices during their lifetime, and they've never been able to get into this state. It's interesting. I mean, so a lot of the people, at least in the initial cohorts, I mean, I think maybe he's attracting a different kind of sample now than he did then, but that's who was showing up, were the people who went like, okay, I tried everything, nothing worked. And then, so these are usually very, very well prepared people who may be doing all kinds of yoga, all kinds of spiritual disciplines and practices for a long coming to this, and then suddenly it's like, here, we just tweak a few things and now off we go.
My experience in digital personal response, these people are already well prepared before they do this course.
Yeah, but we don't, not necessarily, not in all cases. I'm just saying that as a heuristic. We would have to look at his data.
Ultimate question, if you look at all the other correlates, what are the factors, the founding factors, or what are these people's early life experiences, or was there any correlation between which are the kind of people who respond more?
He did, I don't know all of that, I don't know how many of those were, he was really focused on, like, the advice he was getting from his, the Harvard people was, you need to use gold standard measures to measure psychological well-being, because otherwise, won't believe what you're doing. And so he sort of focused on that. And so if you actually read his paper, it's kind of boring because all these guys, like, it's about 10 different measures of, are you depressed or are you happy? He's not really looking at it. And I think that's unfortunate. I think that there's probably in the intake data that he's got, there's information about how long have you practiced any experience and so on. It'd be very interesting to look at that. He has offered to give access to myself and my students to all of the data. You can want, but we have on purpose use any of his data first to begin. And also have no conflict of interest. So I was on his advisory board at one point for his Trans Tech Lab, and I resigned from the board. So it's not to have a conflict.
One last question, and then we have to move on.
It clearly seems like a very powerful program. So how do you get into something like this?
Oh, you go to the website and you click on.
On the site.
What?
What's the website called? Is it Finders Club?
Finders course, or just look for Jeffrey Mishlove.
That's a good question. We'll get that.
Jeffrey Martin, yeah. It's easy to find. If you put in Finders course, you'll find the Finders course. Then it'll say, we're not doing the Finders course anymore. It's a 45-day challenge. We'll take you to a 45-day challenge page that explains what it is. And then, you pay your money and you sign his boilerplate contract. And then away you go. And it's like, it used to be like $2,000, but I think it's like the 45-day challenge. It's like 500 or something. And he's got, okay, so just to say a little bit more about it. So he's got all these techniques that so you're supposed to practice them for 1 to 2 hours a day, right? It's the positive psychology things. And then once you get into the meditation technique, you have to practice the meditation. But he also organizes people in groups. And he has kind of like people who are working with the groups. So you're talking to other people about what your experiences are, what's happening, like it's working, it's not working. And I think a lot of the benefit of that program is in the networking. The people we talked to, certainly that was their experience as well, that networking, and that networking continues after you finish the course. So people still keep meeting years later.
Great. That was mind blowing. Wasn't it? That was like being Hindu, being Indian, we probably sometimes overheard the word enlightenment. You hear that every rishi became enlightened, Shiva was enlightened. And I and my dad and I had a very spirited conversation about this. Like, what does this mean? And I think for the first time in my life, I've actually seen something quantify it. So I thank you for that. Really incredible. So great job on that. Another question I have for you is, what location are you in? Zero. You're at 0. Thank goodness, because I thought he was going to tell me to shut up anyway. Anything higher than that would be. So thank you. No, that was fabulous. That was really, and you made such a complex thing so simple, and I think that's a great compliment to you. It's very hard to do that. Appreciate it. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce, and before I say that also, this is very organic. This whole day has been very amazing. It's just like, it's just come together. None of this has been planned, just so that you know, none of this has been planned. But each of the speakers are somehow building on each other. You've got the fundamentals that have been introduced, and then you've got somebody who says, yeah, kind of it works. And then somebody is a little stronger than that, and maybe it's going to end in a grand crescendo with Dr. Akil. Akshay, our very dear friend, and again, Akshay is one of the organizers along with me. We organize the event, and so thank you very much, Akshay. So for a formal introduction to Dr. Vasudev. Dr. Vasudev is an experienced psychiatrist who specializes in providing holistic mental health for all his patients. He tries to bring the person's experience of mental diversity as a starting point in their own recovery using concepts of awareness and self-improvement. Also a qualified yoga and breath-based meditation instructor who provides classes for the same outside of him. So please help me welcome Dr. Akshay. Right is forward. I won't be.
The other,
They're hardly here. Very different from these folks. Honest, and that's my first disclosure. The slides are very eclectic. They are based on my own teacher. He has Jeffrey Martin as a guide to think of. I think of only one person, but I don't even think of him as a person. I just see him as an energy source. And according to ancient Indian way of looking at the guru, that's what it is. It's just an energy source. His name is Gurudev Sri Ravi Shankar. He's based out of Bangalore in India. But I don't see him that way, that I have to go and meet him and try and find that new source of energy, that knowledge for my intellect. That's gone. Now I have to stay here. I have to be here in the present moment 100% of the time. And that's what yoga is, isn't it? We heard it and we experienced it in the morning. Deeply. I was here for 3 hours just experiencing the breath and the movement, and every moment was just bliss. And some of you were with me during the end part. The majority of the people were getting more gray hair anyway. Were here experiencing at least a glimpse of that non-duality, which is pure awareness. It doesn't care about any sorrow, despair, anger, greed, jealousy, or positive emotions. Happiness, joyful. Yeah, maybe I'm in location something, I don't care. And I don't know what that means now. But it is our own availability for that awareness to dawn in us to make yoga happen. It is all our own equipment. As Gurudev Sri Ravi Shankar says, we have 7 levels of existence, more than the 3 or 4 levels he mentioned earlier. Let's go through them so that you understand where I'm coming. Are we all here? Yeah. But who is here? Do you know? Come on, speak up. Tell me, what do you think? Who is here right now? That person who's sitting right here, who is here? The ego is here. Mind is here. Okay.
consciousness.
Consciousness, the highest level. Okay.
Awareness.
Awareness. Oh, we're definitely going higher. Good.
My body.
Body. That's the one I was hoping somebody would speak. We are here because we identify with our body. We are here because we function using our body. And most of yoga relies deeply on the body. If you don't get into various positions, how are you going to find who you really are? If I think I'm consciousness, then you're stupid, I'm sorry. You can't get there, but first go to the basic level. That you have a body, which is divine, which is beautiful, which has been given to you to experience higher states of consciousness. Let's start with it. Then the next level comes is the mind. And we know what the mind does. The monkey mind, as we call it, right? Left, right, up, down. According to ancient Vedantic tests, it just actually splits it up into 2. Past or present. Never in the present moment. And that's very simple to understand. Like it constantly vacillates between the past and present, and then we have those states of a mind that I'm anxious, I'm worried. If I'm in the future, I'm thinking about the future. Or I'm actually glorifying the past as well. I'm so happy then. I don't know where I am now. then I'm regretful about the present moment, as if we have forgotten what the or I'm in the future, worried about the future, thinking something bad is going to happen. It's here right now. But how do we get to the present moment? If that is so beautiful, and that's what every yoga teacher is trying to say, come to the present moment. How do we get it? Well, the third level of existence is your breath, which we heard a lot today about pranayama. We experience the depth of the present moment just with the silence that comes. When we go into that state of silence after each exhalation, if you have had a good asana. The breath. So body, breath, mind, intellect. You're here, right? You are thinking about what I'm saying. You have tried to encapsulate and you're comparing it. Whether this one is a better talk, or it calmly do the better talk. Well, Paresh did use his intellect right there, right? Oh, we are going into the crescendo now. What are we doing? We're just playing with our intellect. We're trying to judge whether this is good or bad. And that's the trick word for me. Good or bad. That's where our, according to Vedantic texts, are likes and dislikes. So I like this, so I'm going to run towards that because it gives me some satisfaction at an intellectual level, or even for a sensory level. I find some satisfaction if I'm getting into that pose or I'm enjoying that ice cream. I love ice cream. I'm sure a lot of people here like ice cream. Yeah, okay. Or some people like savories. We all have our own likes and dislikes. But that can't be me alone because my likes and dislikes quieten down. The people's coming.
I'll listen. Carry on.
Our likes and dislikes stop when we are sleeping. That means that can't be my true nature. So who am I really? That is the basic question which we need to ask ourselves to get into a higher state of consciousness. I would love to see Iman's ultrasound sculpting, what that is about. But I'm inviting us all to think about what has been previously defined very beautifully of awareness by asking the question using self-inquiry, who am I? Who is thinking the question, who am I here right now? Which equipment, which level of existence am I using? Or I might be stuck in the level of the ego or the memory, the other two levels of existence. The memory makes us think, I was good then, maybe I'm not so good now. Maybe I need to be better based on what other people are experiencing. Again, that the intellect is coming. But usually we are very self-focused, aren't we? We are comparing about our own memories, our own experiences. And who's that our? We usually limit it to the ego again. That's the big elephant in the room, isn't it? I am here because I'm here. I've made my job. I am a psychiatrist. I know what I'm saying. You bloody well listen. That's what I say. But you know, that's what the ego can do. It can make us feel narcissistic at one level or completely low. And I'm worthless, I'm useless, I'm not deserving of this. And we see it. I see it in clinic every day. Just a game. The enlightened masters who have given us this direction of self-inquiry say, none of these states are permanent. If you become a witness, by just being aware of who you are, then you will let go of these identifications, the body, breath, mind, intellect, memory, ego. It's so simple. Just let go. And finally, you let go and then reintegrate back that everything is just one. So if I'm experiencing something as dual, it's because my own mind, my own memory, my own imagination, usually my own fantasy, what enlightenment is. My imagination is that God's going to come and descend over my head. I'm going to see some blue lights. You know, all those fantastical spiritual awakening experiences. That's not true. As Iman showed in his presentation, was so beautiful, wasn't it? That we we don't even care about finding bliss. At that level of awareness, you are just there. So I'm trying to write a book, and thanks to Ernst, he was very good editor and supporting me and saying, "What have you written?" And so, yeah, who's written this? I don't know. I keep changing it. Trying to go to the depth of what we really need to know to let go of that too. That's what awareness is. Any concept that you build on today is false. That should be our starting point. Is false because everything you are thinking now is limited. Using a limited mind, a limited intellect, a limited memory. The state of enlightenment cannot be described. It can only be experienced at that highest level of awareness, where then nothing touches. That's what means to the concept of universal consciousness. 15 minutes, did you realize? Gone on. Not one single slide. Now you can enjoy the slides. I've talked about Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, but he's from a lineage of long masters based out of India who believe in Raja Yoga or contemplation, as Kamini alluded to earlier, which means we let go of all these identifications. I've had the privilege to read through most of the textbooks about these great authors. From Yogananda Paramahansa, Autobiography of Yogi, most people have read it. Yeah. Ramana Maharshi, out of South India, great, you've read it too. Ramakrishna Paramahansa from East India, West Bengal, great sage. His stories are amazing. And of course, his Shishya or disciple, Swami Vivekananda. And Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, in my eyes, being honest, I think he didn't even need to have a guru. He came enlightened. There are some magical stories about it. You just need to read to believe. But all we are trying to do is be self-realized. That's what yoga is all about, isn't it? So Gurudev says yoga is not just exercise and asana, it's emotional integration and spiritual elevation, a higher level of elevation with a touch of the mystic. That's what really hooked me in. Kamini says I'm a bit odd. I am maybe. Because for me, mysticism has always drew me to something beyond what I see, feel, hear, using the five senses. Gives you a glimpse of something beyond all imagination. That's the key word, beyond all imagination. If you stick with one experience, then yoga is not going to happen. Drop that too. That's what we are doing. So, the simple definition of yoga, as per himself, is yoga is connecting the gross to the subtle, physical to the ethereal. Gross body? No, it's not true. Subtle, that's your mind. That's the first step. Become aware that you have a mind. You don't even aware that you have a mind. Most of us are just running around and thinking we do something because a mind tells us to do it, and we don't think. Physical to the ethereal. It's so much deeper. That's one second stage. From the individual identification that I am here to the cosmic identification that I'm part of this universe, and what I think I am is not really there. Because there is only one. If I remember that, then I become a part of the cosmos. I become non-significant, yet significantly non-significant. If that makes sense. Did it? Mm-hmm. Okay. Other stages as described in stages of enlightenment are as the ego starts to go from arrogance to self-confidence. I used to play that game myself. Oh, somebody's touched upon me, my ego, probed me, poked me, and I'm feeling bad, right? So my self-confidence goes down. But what really poked it was my own arrogance. If I'm self-confident, how can arrogance even touch me? It's that idea. From meekness to humility. Humility comes naturally at one stage. You don't care about what other people think of you. My art of living teacher, co-teacher is here. What Soumya is there with me, right? And we always say, there are a few knowledge points which you need to come and experience in the happiness. It's so powerful. Gurudev says, do not seek the intention behind other people's mistakes. What mistake? Mistakes are happening everywhere around us. Can we be 100% in this room getting the right people at the right time and doing the right asana? Impossible. If you are humble enough, you realize that this whole world is 100% just a mistake. Yet, it is a beautiful mistake. You don't care anymore. You are there. You're just a witness to it. Then, of course, you become humble. It's natural. And that was the clincher for me, from burden of dependence to realization of interdependence. This program won't be a success if you all weren't here. I can't be talking to myself. Right? We are all dependent on each other. The more we realize this, then we find universal consciousness happening right now. We are completely independent. So it's not just, some people who Vedantic studies get, oh, I'm going to just meditate and I'm becoming one. And what about the rest of the world? Aren't you dependent on them? You can't be just chilled out and feel everybody is separate from you. No, it's all about everyone being one. And that's him. Having fun, celebrating life all the time. Just little parrot on his shoulder. And you need to experience, just go to Bangalore once and go to his ashram if you can. Just one master. I'm sharing my own personal experience. It doesn't have to, you have to choose him, please. No, that's not by any stretch of imagination or suggestion that I'm giving. You'll find one yourself. Or go to the finder's course. You've got another option today. That's what you want to do. You just want to let go of these cravings and the recognition that I want to be someone, from a limited ownership to oneness with the whole. That's what it is. I was planning to do a meditative exercise, but I will do a very quick one for 5 minutes. We have been doing a lot of yoga and meditation throughout the 3 hours which we hear from 11 to 2. I'm going to go very, very simple. All I'm asking you to give is give me your 100% attention and just don't have any preconceived ideas. You're just going to be here. You're going to close your eyes now. Okay? Sit comfortably as you want. Well, as we heard, yoga is about being comfortable. Sukham, Siram Sukham Asana. Even sitting is yoga. So just sit. Eyes closed. And just become aware of the noises in the environment. What you're hearing, sound of the projector, any noises outside, whatever you hear, just become aware. Become aware of you who is breathing. The body is breathing. The chest is expanding. You are witnessing your body breathing. You are not the body. The breath is just a part of you, not even the breath. Become aware of any thoughts or feelings you might have. Good thoughts, bad thoughts, let them be. Don't try and stop them. You are not your thoughts. You are just aware of your thoughts. Notice any sensations in the body. or a sense of lightness in your head area. As you become more aware, your body relaxes, your mind expands. Your mind is nothing but a wave function. It's all around you. It's very subtle, subtle than space even. You're not your mind. Let it be. Let your mind expand or contract. Whatever is happening, let it be. You're a witness to your own mind. All thoughts, all feelings, they just keep changing. Let them change. You are changeless. You are quiet. You are peace. You are beyond words. Take a deep breath in and become aware of your sensations within in your body and your breath. Every experience, every thought that you're having is your own. Nobody can take it from you. You are the supreme consciousness encapsulated in this body, this mind, this intellect. You and the supreme consciousness are just one. Knowing this, experiencing this, becoming aware of this fact, you are here. There is no denial. Everything is the way it's supposed to be. Accept this unconditionally. Slowly bring your awareness back to your breath. To the noises in the environment. When you feel ready and complete, you may open your eyes. That's it. Questions for Archit?
If I reach enlightenment, can I stop taking my meds?
There is no body there. the joke. We have to look after our body, right? We have a brain, we have kidney, we have liver. Like, how can you not look after the body? It's been given for a specified duration. But if you're talking about medications for the mind, for severe mental illnesses like bipolar disorders, schizophrenia, dementia, that's a brain illness. It's not just the mind. And so I'm very careful when I say, yeah, you can stop this. No. Mild depression, mild anxiety, fine. Psychosis, bipolar, they are serious brain illnesses. Should be very careful. So you're all enlightened today.
Then we put the day, and I think I'm just reflecting back on the day, and I think it's been amazing. I think it's been beautiful, right, Laura? Would you agree? Again, what's beautiful about it is actually none of this was planned. It just happened. And I think, as people say, good intentions always manifest in something good. I've never met you two. I know this, but I didn't know what they were going to talk about. It was just like, good faith, you'll do it. Caroline, I know you'll do a great job. Everyone. And it just, so we in this room and through Aksharai, you have access to everything really that we've talked about, almost the 8 limbs of yoga, which once starting with the practice, and Caroline did a wonderful job just teaching us how to sit and stand. And that alone it took half an hour, and that was just amazing. And we have Chi Yoga, we had meditation, Somya was here. So we've got the practitioner that can help with the physical part and meditation part. The knowledge was just mind-blowing by Laura, by Dr. Barus here. And the company gave us the overview. So really, you cannot walk away here saying that you don't know what yoga is. I think anybody who's here, you're very lucky. You're one of the few that really gets it, really gets it. And it's not just up here. It's everywhere, and to the point where we can even measure everywhere now, thanks to the location analysis by Dr. Barros. And I think that was just a real amazing thing for me personally. That's great. Again, thank you for coming. I really appreciate all the support, and please spread the word. We will do this again this year, next year. We're not sure, but we do need everyone's support to make it happen. Like Akshay said, we are interdependent. So with that said, thank you again very much. And those who want to stay back and help us clean up and maybe take a couple of pictures here, that is great. Okay, thank you so much.
Before you all go, I still don't have full clarity about your parking tickets. I've asked around people, we were told it's free parking here. Those may be, if you have to pay $500.
Yeah, so if you go to the front desk, give you a parking pass, which should cover.
You still have to pay.
Okay, so for us, I could stay here longer, but this you should be fine for 2 hours. So thank you again. Right.